Hey, welcome to the Star Wars Unlearned Podcast. My name is Josiah Schuett, and I'm joined by Nathan Hawley. What we're doing is we're looking at Star Wars from the perspective of its creator. So we're turning off our fan brains and really just trying to uncover the story that Lucas is trying to tell. We're kicking off our series on Attack of the Clones, where we explore the filmmaking, the history, the mythology, and everything else that Lucas and his team used to bring this second chapter of the Star Wars saga to life. So join us as we dive in and unlearn what we have learned about the Star Wars story.
Okay. Attack of the Clones, baby.
We finally made
Woo!
it. Episode 2.
I'm so excited, man. I can't wait. I am so excited.
Yes, let's do it. Episode 2. Originally titled, you know what the original title was? The working title? So Episode 1, the working title was The Beginning, until they came up with the title Phantom Menace. And so Attack of the Clones, when George Lucas delivered the script to his production team, do you know what the title was?
No, I don't.
Star Wars Episode 2, blank.
No, I've never heard this.
Jar Jar's Great Adventure.
Oh. Nice.
A nice little joke, since the fan base was so receptive to Jar Jar Binks. Episode 1, he's like, yeah. We'll make episode 2 all about Jar Jar's Great Adventure.
Yeah,
so,
that is funny. I did not know that. Yeah,
every once in a while I'll call this movie Jar Jar's Great Adventure.
There you go. Yeah, that's great. I do know that Ewan McGregor, when he first learned the title of this movie, he just started laughing. He laughed really hard. You can watch it on YouTube today, I think. But yeah, he thought it was really funny. He just cracked up. Like, Attack of the Clones, really? But I don't know if he meant that as a sarcastic way or he just thought, oh, that's cool. I don't know, but it's he was just cracking up. So I love it. It's epic.
It's one of those great Star Wars kind of, I've said this before, but kind of on the edge of being corny titles, like The Empire Strikes Back or Attack of the Clones is very, very pulpy, very action adventure, 1930s serial comic book name. So it is kind of there's a what's the word? It's lighthearted. Well, attack is not lighthearted. That's not the word either. I don't know. I can't think of the word, but it's very, I don't know, kind of over the top and kind of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those serials,
not quite
the
corny.
Adventures,
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah, I was listening to the podcast, the commentary on this today, and George was saying that, like this was all, Star Wars is all inspired by the 1930s, right? Those serials and Flash Gordon and stuff, and he gets so criticized for especially the dialogue, and he said openly, like, that's very intentional. Like, I'm trying to make a 1930s film in this. That's what I'm doing. I wrote it that way, and everybody always criticizes him for it, but it's helpful when you go back and think about that. Like, this is very intentional. This isn't supposed to be modern, whatever kind of I don't know how to even describe modern dialogue, but I've noticed that with some of the Disney stuff, like it just doesn't fit, because it's not meant in that old way. And you can go back and watch interviews with Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford and those guys. They talk about the dialogue being clunky all the way back then. This isn't a new thing. It was always meant to be this way. And just seeing that in that context is really helpful, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
The title. Yeah, same exact thing, right? The crawl.
Yeah, everything is done in that style.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
And it's not just 1930s movie serials too. Especially, and this movie is a great example of that, where he's bringing in influences from 1930s romantic movies. He's talking about like mystery, like film noir kind of stuff. There's like Obi-Wan's whole journey through this is very much like the detective going on a case, trying to track down the mysterious killer. That's very 1930s. Not necessarily. There were movie serials that had plots like that, but that's not so much Flash Gordon. This is more, Raymond Chandler, Humphrey Bogart kind of Maltese Falcon kind of mystery kind of thing from that era. And of course the romance is, way more, he's, pulling from things like Romeo and Juliet with this particular romance and stuff. So there's a lot of influences going on here, but particularly, the dialogue and even, it gets a lot of criticism for the romantic dialogue, as you said, in this movie is definitely pulled from old school, old Hollywood kind of influences, 1930s for sure.
Yeah. This one I feel like gets criticized the most, maybe aside from Jar Jar and the Phantom Menace. Particularly just some of the dialogue. So I would say the dialogue is most criticized in this movie out of the 6 of them, from what I can tell. But yeah, which I think is important for us to talk about because this is intentional, and a lot of people blamed it on Hayden Christensen. And it's like, no, I don't. No, even Mark Hamill himself said no. He did what George told him to do. This was very intentional, and Mark knows that. He's been there, so this is all very intentional. So we see that now as Hayden's other acting stuff. He's great. Just fine. Anyway, we will get into that. Hey, before we get started in the depths of this, I was wondering if you could tell the audience, what's the difference here with the digital aspect? Because George, I was reading that archive book, and the whole first section is all about digital and how they went digital. And so I was just wondering if you can kind of describe that real quick. Like, what does that mean? What's the difference? Because you can feel it as an audience member, even if you don't know anything about filmmaking. Like, you just look at episode 1 and episode 2 and know, oh yeah, this is different. Something's different. So can you enlighten us, all of us laymen on the digital terms?
Yeah, I'll do what I can. Yeah, this movie is very important in the history of filmmaking, the history of Hollywood, because it was the first full-length feature film to be projected and shot digitally, and that was a big deal, because before that, film, that's where the name comes from. It comes from the material that the images are captured on. And so Phantom Menace was shot on film. The reshoots, as we talked about in previous podcasts, were filmed digitally, because there was originally a plan to have Phantom Menace be shot on digital, but they couldn't get the cameras and the lenses ready. The technology wasn't quite ready for them to start shooting, and so they filmed it on celluloid film, and then when they went back to do reshoots, they did that digitally, because the cameras were kind of ready, and also do a little bit of a trial run. And even then, it's much easier to spot those digital shots in Phantom Menace because they look slightly different. They have a different veneer to them. They have a slightly different look to them, and they weren't quite there yet, especially the fidelity wise. Episode 2 has much higher fidelity, much cleaner look to it than those reshoots did in Phantom Menace. But the reason this is such a big deal is because, and George Lucas was working on this all the way back to the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles and those movies back in like the 90s, and where he was experimenting with digital effects. Like, he was pushing ILM to these greater heights and trying to push the technology to imagine scenes and visuals that no one could have done practically or in any kind of analog way. And so the problem with that when you're shooting on film is that you have these digital effects. When you're shooting on film, you have to then scan that film into the computer to composite the digital effects in, and then you have to print that back out again onto film. And that's a very expensive process to do both, to take the film and scan it, and then to take the digital effects that have been composited in and reprint that onto a new roll of film to be projected in theaters. So that's a very, very big expense in filmmaking. And so it was, in one way, it was a huge cost-effective decision to shoot it digitally. Then you just skip that step. They're both steps of scanning it and then reprinting it. So that was a big deal. And also, it just made it easier to, when you're shooting on film, that film has to be developed in order to see what you shot. And so when you're on the day, if you liked something you like to take, you would tell your crew, print that. And so that what they would do, that meant is that the next day or the next week, whenever they could, they would print that take because they knew that you liked it, so you could review it. This is what they called dailies. So you'd go into a small screening room and watch dailies, and it would be the different takes that you asked for them to be printed before. But you'd have to wait a long time to see what you shot, and if there's any kind of problem, if there was any sort of, something wrong with the camera, or something wrong with the developing process, you could lose it. And so what the advantage of digital is, you can see the take right there on set. You can see what's happening. You know exactly what it's going to look like right there. You don't have to wait 24 hours, at least 24 hours to see, if not longer, to see what it'll look like. And so just all along the way, it was just much more efficient to do this. And, Lucas was credited, I think, I was quoted as saying during the production of episode 2, in one of the interviews, he said, in my opinion, we should have been shooting digital cinema 20 years ago.
Yeah, I read that.
That was in 2002.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, and he's right, because it's it's digital editing. Everything is just much more streamlined, so much easier. It's the reason I can edit these podcasts that we do. That's all done digitally. It's all because of that revolution. The reason there was so much resistance to that, the reason it took them so long to get to that, was just the fact that film is such a great medium for storing detail, and you can get such a good fidelity, great detail, great color. It just captures so much information. And digital, it kind of not quite caught up to it yet. Like, so episode 2 is like kind of just where they just started to be neck and neck. And now a lot of times digital can capture way more information than film. Depends on the film stock and depends on what digital format you're using. But anyway, so there was a lot of skeptics going into this. So for a lot of the efficiency reasons and just because George is just an innovator and he wants to always push things and he and just because it's easier to deal with digital stuff than film. That's less cumbersome in many ways. So that's a lot of why this was shot digitally.
Well, I was reading this morning. It almost sounded like George really is one of the big pioneers in this movement.
Absolutely.
Not only in just using the technology, but pushing the technology. Like, I don't know how much he had in a hand in inventing it necessarily, but he was pushing them, being like, "Hey, I have this idea. Let's do this." And he shared a story in the archive book about he was meeting with some of the guys from Sony, I think, and he was saying like, "Hey, this is what we need. Do this." And the guy was sitting there at the lunch table and he got quiet. I think he was the engineer or something for like 25 minutes and was just walking around the table. And then he said this engineer just like slammed his hand on the table. Was like, "I can do it. I think I can do it. I figured out this way to do it." And then just walked out. And that's like what happened. So I think George, from my understanding, was a real pioneer in all this. And that's just who George is. I mean, like we saw, I'm sure we'll talk about when we get to the original trilogy. But he's a huge pioneer in special effects and ships. And I mean, the way we do film today. And we talked about that with Phantom Menace too. Like the way we understand movies today would not exist without George Lucas. And I just got the impression here that this digital movement was a huge piece of that. And I wanted to quote George here. He shares a little bit of the story in the archive book about all this digital stuff. And his final comment is, "And of course, the Hollywood studios fought us the whole way." So that was interesting. Yeah, kind of to support what you were saying earlier. How it's just the industry was like, no, we're not going to do this. And George's like, "Oh, I'm just going to do it." It just sounds like George.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well, because it's, he's the filmmaker, he's the auteur, he's the director. He wants to keep pushing things and pushing. He wants to explore. And again, the film industry is an industry. It's a business, and they want to play it safe because we've done the math. We know that this type of movie, this type of filmmaking process, all these procedures will get us a return on our money. But you're talking about something that's untested, unproven. We could be taking a huge financial loss here. And so both sides are doing their jobs, right? It's the artist's job to push things, and it's the businessman's job to say, "Oh no, calm down. Let's, I don't want the whole company collapse because you're getting too excited."
Yeah, we need to actually make money.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yep.
it's very much kind of like the push and pull between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Anakin. You're right. There's like the more conservative of the two, and the one who's always trying to push the boundaries, right? And so Lucas is definitely more the Anakin or the Luke kind of character, the Qui-Gon character. So he's the maverick. He's always pushing things. So yeah, and another thing I forgot to mention was that a big part of this is projecting the movie digitally too. You may remember this. I was a little too young to kind of remember this time, but before digital projection, when you're projecting something on film, it can be kind of a toss-up what the quality is going to be. Especially the more you run, and you worked in the movie theater, so maybe you experienced this. I'm not sure, but it might have been more digital by the time you did it. But the more you project a film, the more it degrades, more dirt there is, more scratches. Like everything just starts to deteriorate, and you can get very different level of quality. And this also extends to sound and everything. That's part of what THX was setting a standard for sound quality in theaters across the country. And so Lucas was a big proponent of making sure that the theatrical experience, that the audience got the movie that he was editing in his screening room at the ranch at Lucasfilm. So at Skywalker Ranch. So a big part of that was digital projection too. You could have that consistency of the quality of the image in theaters.
Yeah,
so that was another
boy.
reason to shoot it digitally. So
I feel like we can
digitally.
personally attest to that in the past month. We got to go back and watch Phantom Menace.
Oh yeah,
like with that full experience, it was amazing. And I remember as a kid seeing all that. I remember seeing the dirt on the the scratches on the film. And I remember, I think I saw this in person. But you can go back and watch videos of it, like when the film actually burns, where the film burns up as it's playing, and it just kind of goes to black or it goes to white. Actually, is that white screen? Yeah, I remember some of that. Yeah, I remember one of the first digital movies I saw was Revenge of the Sith. It was great. It's like, wow, it's so different. Yeah,
that's cool. That's cool. You remember that? Yeah, I'm sure I had seen movies projected on film because again, this didn't really catch on until after Attack of the Clones. There were several. But one thing that stunk about Attack of the Clones is they ended up having to print it all on film anyway because there weren't enough theaters that were projecting digitally that they could have just left it like that. They had to do a film print as well. But by the time you got to Revenge of the Sith, and definitely by the time we got into the 2010s. But after the 2000s, that was kind of the end of filming or projecting on film. After that, it was very digital, or pretty much digital all the way. So yeah, Lucas was a huge pioneer for that. Digital television was kind of what existed before that. So he didn't invent like digital cameras, but adapting all the technology and all the procedures and all the the techniques for film. He was a huge pioneer for that. So that was
That's right.
You're for sure.
Yeah, because I read that today. He talked about he'd go to TV studios or something like that, or maybe it was Sony or something, and said, "Hey, we want to use your TV cameras for the film." And they were like, "Are you serious? Why would you downgrade it and go down?" Yeah, I forgot about it. Yeah, and this is also the last movie on VHS, isn't it, to come out on VHS? I don't think they did Revenge of the Sith on VHS. If I remember,
that's a great question. I don't know.
I know they did Attack of the Clones because I had it, but I don't think they had Revenge of the Sith on VHS.
That's true. That's a good another
move to DVDs
milestone. Oh, I don't know.
Oh.
I remember this was the first one we had on DVD as a kid. I remember we had Phantom Menace on VHS, and we found a DVD of Attack of the Clones, and it was in full screen.
Oh yeah,
you remember that full screen versus widescreen with the black bars on the side to fit our square TVs as opposed to now we have. I forgot about that. Yeah, now it's all rectangled, but
I did too.
Yeah, but I remember that. Yeah, so actually I never saw the full movie. Attack of the Clones until I got the Blu-rays. I think I never really saw the full frame of the video of I didn't saw the full frame, all the detail from each scene until I saw it on Blu-ray.
Boy, I remember that.
I had the full screen version as a kid on DVD.
Movies used to come out with widescreen and or full screen. You had to choose.
Yeah, exactly.
Like 4K
you could pick
versus
one.
Blu-ray. Yeah,
you could pick one.
Choose which one.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I remember I bought one movie in college that was full screen. I was like, nope, never again. I hate this. I want the widescreen. That was the only full screen movie I ever had, which is interesting because VHS, that's what they all were. It was just full screen, and then we got this cool widescreen thing. It's like, wow, you can see so much. Yeah, it was great. Showing my age a little bit here, but it was fun. So
no, yeah, me too, dude.
Yeah.
I remember all that too.
Yeah. So, well, thanks. I wanted to bring that up because I feel like we had to at least talk about it because this is so instrumental, or at least pioneering in the digital movie realm. But I didn't quite understand it because some of that goes over my head. So I was hoping you could explain a little bit. So thanks.
Well, absolutely. And it's an important part of the legacy of Star Wars that it's always, and even to this day, it is still pushing things. Like think of Mandalorian with the LED walls, right? Like that is a huge step forward in the technology of filmmaking. And
what do they call that?
The volume.
Volume. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when Lucas, he visited the set there, and there's a clip of him having a conversation with somebody where he was kind of saying like, this is what we were dreaming of back in, when I was making the prequels. This is what we were trying to do. This is what we were trying to get to. Just that freedom of moving the background. And he was doing this kind of in the post process with editing. He was moving things around, moving characters, and now you can do it real time with the wall behind you. But little things like that. Star Wars has always kind of been pushing the boundary of technology. And so this movie was a huge step in that legacy of Star Wars. Yeah. To use a very sacrilegious quote, boldly going where no one has gone before. Star Trek, not Star Wars, but Star Wars did do that in terms of visual effects.
Oh yeah, which is really cool, and it's neat that we are where we are with the volume and things like that. Because I've heard so many actors, including some of these Episode 2 actors, say how hard it was to try and act with nothing but a blue room. Like Obi-Wan on Camino, like there's nothing there. He's just working in a big blue room. Lord of the Rings, Ian McKellen, Gandalf, he had a really hard time with that. In fact, he even broke down a few times and just saying, this is so hard. So it's kind of neat to see it, like George was really trying to help these guys get started on that and get to where we are today. And who knows what it'll be like when our kids are older, I mean, it'll just be something else, but
yeah.
Okay, nice. Well, thanks. This is just a little bit of housekeeping I wanted to get.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to skip over that, but that is an important part of this movie's story. So yeah, absolutely.
Very big. And that's why it looks so different too, right? I mean, because you can just tell it just looks so different. I mean, I have, for those of you who are listening, I have on my screen the clones as my background, and just looking at the digital clones versus like my face, real life face, it's so different, And I feel like that's kind of the difference between like 4, 5, 6, and 1 versus 2 and 3. You can just see the difference. But worth acknowledging because a lot of people didn't like it. A lot of people were really, really taken off guard by this digital move. So I mean, George was loving it because it gave him so much more freedom. But to actually get the images out of his head that he wanted to do, right, in 4, 5, and 6, but couldn't do it. But I know as fans, there were a lot of people who were really upset with that. Just didn't like the aesthetics, didn't like how it felt.
Yeah, and I like the I don't think there's any intention behind this, but I like how it kind of worked out this way, that there is a distinct visual change when there's big time jumps in the story. So from Phantom Menace to Episode 2, there's a big time jump. There's like 10 years difference, and so it looks very different. And Episodes 2 and 3, they look very similar because they're only like 3 years apart. They look very similar. And then from Episode 3 to Episode 4, there's a big visual change because there's a big time jump there. So it almost kind of I think kind of helps the story in a way. I have these big changes from film to digital and back to film, where it's like it sort of visually reinforces, oh, time has passed, things are different, we're in a different time, different time and space kind of thing. I don't know. Just to me, it always kind of worked that way. Like Phantom Menace felt older because it was on film still, and then Attack of the Clones kind of felt more contemporary, and then Revenge of the Sith, same thing. And then the original trilogy kind of didn't, it obviously looks older, but I could also just feel like the galaxy had deteriorated, or felt like it was a little less shiny, a little less pristine. Things have fallen apart. So you can interpret it that way. Again, this is all very, again, interpretive, up to the audience's eye, in each individual member's taste. But I just like that. I remember noticing that one day, like, oh, the shifts in the visual style from digital to film actually happen during these big gaps in the story. So just a little funny thing I noticed one day. I'm like, oh, kind of works.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Now you just want to jump into the crawl?
Yes,
Kick things off?
I would love to. Man, okay, so I just gotta say this. I was floored already by a few things in the commentary. Listening today, I've never listened to the Attack of the Clones commentary. One, and we'll talk about this later, was how clones, like George always envisioned the stormtroopers to be clones. It's like, what? I didn't know that. That was amazing. We can bring that up later. But I can't help but say that. So just it's like, whoa. Then the second thing is George mentioned how most of the political work was done in episode 1. So episode 2 and 3, he didn't have to focus on that as much. I had never really thought about that. I never knew that before. And you can see that right away. We're not really in the Senate. I mean, it starts off with this murder mystery. So I wanted to share that because it was really cool. And as we get into the crawl, you can see a little bit of it. I mean, there's definitely politics going on, right? I mean, the first line is there's unrest in the Galactic Senate. So definitely there. But I just thought that was interesting how George said most of that political legwork, the establishing, was done in episode 1, which again is just another reason why episode 1 is so important. I guess I don't remember if we talked about that part necessarily in episode 1, how it's establishing so much of the politics of Star Wars. Where we talked a lot about how it establishes Anakin and the Jedi and some good stuff there, but not really the politics. So that was helpful for me to think about that. I've never thought about that. Episode 2 and 3.
Yeah, episode 1 really is the exposition for the rest of the story. It's the first couple chapters where you're getting to know the world. And so, yes, it's introducing you to the characters. How do the Jedi work? What is the state of the galaxy? What is, Anakin's a slave. There's slavery in the galaxy. There's a queen. She was elected, so she's not an absolute ruler. There's people are electing officials, and so there's politics there, and then of course how the Senate works. So all that is there to, set the stage. And so episode 2 and 3 is really where the story kind of kicks in, and that's of course when Anakin's story picks up. Padme's story is kind of used to help set the stage. In episode 1, her arc, the plot is hers, and it's there to kind of let the audience know, here's the rules of the world we're in. Here's the rules of the galaxy, the politics, everything. So, yeah. And so once Anakin steps in, that's when we're kind of free from all that exposition, and you can now get on with the main thrust of the story. So, yeah, absolutely. And about the clones thing, it's interesting. George's opinion on the clones and the stormtroopers have changed over the years. So I think, I can't remember exactly what his thoughts were before Attack of the Clones. I think his idea is that the stormtroopers weren't clones, but when he was working on Attack of the Clones, his idea was, maybe the stormtroopers are going to be the clones. They're Jango Fett's clones, and they just continue. And then there was, in EU and Legends, and even today in the new canon, there's the ideas of, they're clones, but there's different templates. They're clones of Jango Fett necessarily. They're clones of different people. There's several different batches. But there was a show that was planned that wasn't made. It was, I can't remember the name of it. It was about that Coruscant level, no,
Oh,
that was a video game. There was some live action show Lucas was working on
yeah.
before
Underworld,
he
right? Was
abandoned
it
it.
called just
Was it
Underworld?
was it
I
called?
thought.
I can't remember. Anyway, but
Yeah.
in talking with the people who he worked with on that, there's an interview. I can't remember the guy's name. I have it in my notes somewhere. I can't remember his name, unfortunately. But he talked about how Lucas had changed his mind and that he about the stormtroopers being clones, and he liked the idea that the clones, although they are identical to each other, they find ways to they become these separate personalities, like we see in the show. And Clone Wars, they each have they have different haircuts, different styles, different ways of talking, different personalities. They're very, very unique. And you take their helmets off, and you see a different person underneath each helmet. And then he liked to contrast that with the stormtroopers, being that the fact that they're not the same person. They are individuals, but the Empire has turned them into like drones, mindless clone. There's no individuality. They don't take their helmets off. They don't have personalities. They're not human beings. They're not allowed to be individuals. There's no personality there, and there's no color to their costumes, anything like that. So he liked that contrast later on after Attack of the Clones. But you're right. At this point, you can hear it in the commentary. He mentions it a couple times where he talks about Jango Fett cloning and how that affects going into the stormtroopers. So his thinking on that evolved a bit. But yeah, it was cool. Well, I remember learning that he did think of the clones as being the stormtroopers would be clones as well.
Yeah, that was neat because I never picked up on how he wanted there to be an intentional connection between the clones or stormtroopers and Boba. Like way back, Empire Strikes Back kind of deal. Like he was always sort of tied to that, and we'll talk about that. But like how Boba was supposed to be like a super soldier, and
Yeah, he had white
not
armor.
necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he wasn't necessarily supposed to be this rogue bounty hunter, but which a lot of people complained about for episode 2, how he's connected to that. He was a clone, and the way I understood the commentary was George is very much like, yeah, this is sort of always been my idea, and it's morphed and changed. But I just thought that was kind of neat how there is a connection there. But yeah, and he did say in the commentary like, yeah, how originally he thought the stormtroopers were going to be clones, and then kind of changed. Yeah, I got the implication just the way he was talking that he had changed his mind a little bit. So, and what a contrast! It just shows you the ideology between the Jedi and the Sith. It's just the way the clones are. They're valued as people. There's color. There's life. Individuals. And then the Sith are like, nope, you're just a tool. You're just all going to be conformed. You're my slave. It's like, wow. So anyway, I'm jumping the gun, but that was just super cool. I couldn't help but say that. It was so cool.
Yeah, no,
it just
great.
rocked my world today, as I wanted to share it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, that's
So,
a good one. Good reminder.
Yeah, but we'll get into more of that as we get into Camino and the clones and stuff. So, yeah.
Cool.
All right, crawl, right?
Yep.
Start there.
Beauty. Yeah. I'm just gonna read it because I have it written down here.
Okay.
I have a couple thoughts on it. So it starts out, there is unrest in the Galactic Senate. Several thousand solar systems have declared their intentions to leave the Republic. The separatist movement under the leadership of the mysterious Count Dooku has made it difficult for the limited number of Jedi Knights to maintain peace and order in the galaxy. Senator Amidala, the former Queen of Naboo, is returning to the Galactic Senate to vote on the critical issue of creating an Army of the Republic, in all caps, that's important, to assist the overwhelmed Jedi. So, we had turmoil is engulfing the. What was the beginning of the last crawl? It was I think it was turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. That says there's unrest. Like the Galactic Republic is just never in a good spot. And so after you read the rest of it, you realize things have gotten worse. Before it was just one planet that was at risk, and now the whole Republic is about to fall apart. Right? Padme said last episode that the Republic is no longer functioning, and she was right. And so now the rest of the galaxy is also starting to wake up to this. And so the Senate they're also starting to wake up to the fact that the Senate is corrupted. And so that's why there's a separatist movement. And the last time the Jedi were sent to just settle one conflict, and now there's just so many conflicts, and the conflicts are so huge that they can't do their job properly. And so the Republic is just in this massive decline now. And so already it doesn't say, how much time has passed. If you're watching this for the first time, it doesn't say it's been 10 years or anything like that. But you can see that the trajectory that we left off with in Phantom Menace has not been corrected. It's still going downhill. And yeah. So that's my first initial thoughts on it. But yeah.
George said today in the commentary, I had never thought about this. I always thought about this as episode 3, but he said this really is the birth of the Empire here in episode 2. With the clones and Anakin's first dip into the dark side and Palpatine's power. Like this episode is really the birth of the Empire. And I never thought about that. He talks about how the same ships or same style of ships, same style of armor, like it's all meant to say like, here's step one of the Empire. Um, I just thought that was really cool because I never equated that. I always thought about that in Revenge of the Sith. That moment when it's reorganized into the Galactic Empire, and I never really thought about that. Or Anakin's fall to the dark side in episode 3. That was when I always started equating it. But George said, no, it's here. Like, wow, that's cool. It's already started. I mean, obviously we know the process has started, but George was kind of saying like, no, it's here in everything but name, essentially. Like, whoa, that's cool.
Yeah. Like Revenge of the Sith is sort of when the Empire comes to maturity, but it's born here. Yeah. I mean, as you've pointed out before, the screen behind you right now, as we're zooming right now, is the scene at the end of this movie when all the clones are boarding on the ships to take off to go fight the wars. And what's the music that's playing underneath that scene? It's the Imperial March.
Imperial March, yeah.
It's the first time we hear it in all of Star Wars, and if we're watching it chronologically. So it is the birth of, at least it's the birth of the Imperial March, which leads us to believe in this scene, this is where the Empire starts, and there is Palpatine presiding over everything. And it's, there's no, and when we first see the clones in action, marching around in Camino, it's not happy music we hear. We hear the music of the army that invaded Naboo last movie.
The battle droids.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we hear this really, really, really rough, kind of militaristic, kind of daunting music. And so the clones are not initially depicted as this great thing, and that's why I love the fact that Army of the Republic is in, huge capital letters in the crawl there, because that's a big thing for the Republic to consider creating an army, right? Because the whole point of the Republic was, they've enjoyed these 1,000 years of peace. They haven't had any wars because the Senate has been, supposedly, it was designed to function well and negotiations, and the Jedi are keeping the peace. But now that that's starting to break down, that means, when there's an army now, it's like, this Republic that is, as Palpatine said, that has stood for 1,000 years is going to be split in two. It's all going to fall apart, which of course he sounds upset, but he actually is very excited about that possibility. That's his whole goal. But yeah, this is a big deal, and the whole idea of, an army to assist a Jedi, an army created to assist peacekeepers. Like, that seems like a step in the wrong direction, right? Like, doesn't seem like that was like, and that's a tale as old as time, right? People trying to create an army or get a mob together to settle something, we'll bring peace but through force. Like, okay, careful, this could go really, really bad. And and so just this crawl is just the last crawl was like, oh, there's something bad happening in a corner of the galaxy. But as the movie went on, we went back to Coruscant. We realized, oh, this is a huge problem in the Senate. Like, the problem we thought was just Naboo and the Trade Federation. Actually, there's a whole problem in the Senate too. The whole Republic is kind of like a rotten core, and now that is just spreading now to this point in the movie where the whole crawl here is just bleak. Like, the whole galaxy is on the brink of collapse. So. And it doesn't get much better in the next one because the first word is war. So go from turmoil to unrest to war. That's the trajectory of the prequels, pretty much.
Yeah, and it was really cool for me to think about that in these terms. I had never, and this kind of first started to impact me. We were talking Phantom Menace, how really at the time of the Phantom Menace, the Republic's on this last leg. And I always kind of equated that with episode 2. Like, here's the Republic on its last leg, but by the time we're episode 2, at least my understanding of what George was saying is like, no, it's kind of gone already. It's just, he just hasn't changed the name yet. He hasn't won the conflict yet to solidify everything. But, but putting that in episode 2 is just kind of a new perspective for me. And, Yoda talks about that too, how the shroud of the dark side has fallen. Their powers are diminishing, so I guess I never really thought about like how this all takes place in episode 2 per se. I just kind of always put it in episode 3.
Yeah. Well, it's true. And I think this is specifically, we'll see in this first couple scenes here, this is where the Jedi we first start to see the cracks in their armor, right? The chinks in armor. We're like, oh, this is where the dark side is really starting to affect them. It was brought up in the last movie, like the Jedi were doing fine. They're at the height. Jedi are still at the height of their power and their influence right now. But the first sign of where it's heading, how much it's going to go downhill, starts here, where like now all of a sudden the dark side's clouding everything, and their ability to use the Force is diminished. That wasn't the case in Phantom Menace. The Jedi were doing fine. They just learned, oh, the Sith showed up. Well, that's a problem. We'll look into that. And then 10 years on, they still haven't dealt with that, and that problem has only continued to grow. And so now it's affecting them, and now they're aware of it. Now they're, even if they didn't believe Qui-Gon initially, now they can't help but recognize that there is a problem. There's a threat to their existence right now.
Yeah, that's neat. I just never thought about that before. So anyway, I can go on for that, but it's just neat as turmoil sets in.
Yeah. Let's see. And so now I guess one small thing is there's a name we recognize. Well, Count Dooku, we don't know who that is. This mysterious Count Dooku, some nobleman dude. All right. So he's the leader of the Separatist movement. Who we'll see if he becomes important later on. But then there's a name we do recognize, Amidala, who was the former queen. So now we know at least there is some time has passed because now she's a senator, and that she's returning to vote on the issue of this army. And so that knowing where she was before, that she was pacifistic, and then she became an activist because she wanted to fight to protect her people. But we know that she's not a huge fan of fighting in war. Like she'll avoid that if at all possible. But if push comes to shove, then she knows that she needs to fight to save what needs to be saved. So we'll see. It'd be interesting to see how we're all like, okay, what's Amidala? What's Padme going to do in this situation? So, yeah, and that just kind of leads us into that very, very first shot. You ready to move on to that? The very first scene.
Yeah, just 2 comments real quick. We talked about this with Phantom Menace, but again, we see here, Padme is the driving force of this movie. Of like what happens, just like Leia, like it's gonna be her life and her situations are what drives the story, or like starts the story, I should say, starts the things in motion, right? And we talked about that with Phantom Menace, and we see it again here, how they're out to assassinate her, and it's all part of Palpatine's plan to reveal the clones, which is what George said. Like that's what Palpatine's trying to do here, is get the clones revealed through this murder mystery case. I just thought that was a neat perspective on it, and how it echoes again episode 1 in particular, how this is Padme's thing. And George just recently was at that film festival in France, and he commented on this because there's been criticism on him that there's not enough women in Star Wars, and he said, "You gotta be kidding me!" Like they are one of the biggest leads in this story, and he just said, "Yeah, I didn't put a pair of pants on them and make them look like men," kind of idea, but he said, "You don't need to. They're great. Their brains are great. Like this is their story just as much as it is the other guys." And I just thought that was kind of a neat perspective. And then seeing it again here, Padme's the first one we see again, like just like we did. I guess we saw Obi-Wan first in Phantom Menace, but really he was a side character at that point. It was Padme. He was kind of the main thrust of that, getting the story started, the same thing here. So just a neat homage again. But also, I don't know if George intended this, but I just took it as maybe he's giving us a hint with the mysterious Count Dooku, how this is going to be a murder mystery. I've never really thought of episode 2 as a murder mystery before. And then when he said that in the commentary, I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, I never thought about that. And like you mentioned earlier, how that was a big 1930s influence kind of idea, that murder mystery. I never looked at Attack of the Clones in that light before. So I don't know if he intended that with mysterious Count Dooku, but he's definitely going to be mysterious. And it still kind of gives that phantom aspect to the Sith that we've been seeing so far chronologically. So kind of neat. And I have to say, this is just total two cents freebie here. George kept calling Dooku Doku, and then just kept throwing me for a loop. I was like, wow. Like, even in the movie, they don't call him that, but George called him that, and he kept saying, how do you say Naboo? He said Naboo or something like that? Naboo. But it just really struck me. I was like, wow, that's so interesting that George calls it something different than even they call it in the movies.
Yeah, he's had that where he's been directing. There's scene or behind the scenes stuff where he's directing someone. They say, how do I say this name? He's like, well, you can say it however you want. Like it's a regional accent thing. Like on the East Coast we pronounce it like this, and the West Coast pronounce it like that. And so yeah, it's interesting. He does pronounce things differently, and in the behind the scenes, other people pronounce it Doku as well. Like in the Rob Coleman, the animation supervisor on Attack of the Clones, he was talking with George. They're having a review session of some shots of digital Dooku, and he and Rob would call him Doku, and George would call him Doku, and so yeah, and I think it's part of it is just, the artist never has done tinkering. He's always like, oh, actually, I'd like it to be pronounced this. But then once you start filming, you got to pick one and go with it. I think that's kind of how you get from Princess Leia and Princess Leia. In Episode 4, Yoda
Han and Han.
he calls it, yeah, Han, yeah, exactly. So there's there's a couple other words. I think it's Naboo is the Gungas. There's no N. Gungans. He calls them Gungas. That's a couple times too. George does. So yeah, I think
Interesting.
he's always kind of fluctuating how he wants the characters to be pronounced. And I have a friend who likes to write and come up with worlds and name characters, and he's always kind of, every time he comes back to me with his new ideas on this book he's writing, the characters' names are always kind of changed slightly, and either maybe spelled the name, but he's now changed the pronunciation, and he's big into like the fantasy storytelling kind of thing. So I think of that, where it's just the artist is never really finished. If you keep the painting in front of them, they're always going to keep adding a little bit of color here. I'm going to change this, keep moving it. So you have to take eventually have to take it away from them, because they'll just keep messing with it and keep adding things to it. That's just the artistic impulses, just to keep changing stuff, which people criticize him for specifically in film, but every other art form, artists always go back and touch up their work and change things and add to it. And literature, it happens a lot, and so movies is it's such a popular art form. Everyone it's so widely known, and it seems like it's set in stone, but I don't think it's that big a deal that he goes back and touches up his work every once in a while.
Yeah,
but anyway,
it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I was talking. Oh, the Dooku stuff was good. Padme. Oh yeah, just the Padme thing. That Padme and Leia, they have a very large presence in the movie, but they're also in this movie particularly. Padme is like the most mature of the one. Like and like Anakin's the one she's kind of like having to deal with. Like, okay, dude, you need to. Like, you're grown up, but you're making stupid decisions. Like you say, follow your thoughts through to conclusion. Like, she's having the one who's having to kind of talk some sense into him, so they're definitely. Lucas definitely has Padme and Leia, get this big moving carpet out of my way, or whatever it is. They have authority. They're very strong, of course. Yeah. And yet they still, Natalie Portman made this point where it was such a fun character for her to play, especially in the first one, because she got to wear these amazing outfits, these huge like queen dresses and outfits, but she still, got to be that, she wasn't just this, as we talked about, she wasn't just this kind of face or this personality that was hidden by this mask and this huge gown. Like, she was still a character. She still had personality. She still had agency, and she was still this really, fierce and very, very passionate, very driven character. And that continues, and that's only even more so in this movie, as we see the Padme who she eventually grew into in Phantom Menace. That version of that character is now on full display here in this movie, where she really is who she wants to be. And so and you're right. Her story kind of starts off, and then Anakin's story kind of gets intertwined with hers, and that's how Anakin's story kind of gets going, is once again Padme's someone's trying to kill her. Padme always says someone's trying to kill her. Someone's always trying to kill Padme. And so once again the Jedi get involved with that, and that's how we start to get Anakin and her story intertwined until eventually it becomes their story for the rest of the movie, and then his story mostly in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah. That was a neat perspective. Do you know, I'm trying to think, this isn't the only movie where we pan up after the crawl, is it?
It
Did
is.
we do that in Return of the Jedi? Does
Return
of the Jedi go
the
down?
only Star Wars movie.
It is the only
This
one.
movie is the
Okay.
only one. So this is a fun little. This is my next. Perfect. This is my next note. So I'm glad you asked that. So the tilt up is the one exception in all the opening shots. Every opening shot pans down, but there's also another component to this. So in Empire's last shot is an exception too. So in the last shot of Empire Strikes Back is all those ships flying away, and every other shot in the movies, it's always a shot of the characters, like
the crew,
looking out of something. Yeah. And so every time Lucas sets up a pattern, he usually puts one exception in there as a counterpoint. So we already talked about an example of this. So like when every lightsaber battle has dialogue in it except Phantom Menace, right? That was like one dialogue. That's one lightsaber battle that stands out as different from the other ones. And so there's many other examples of that, but this is one where, both middle movies of the trilogies, Attack of the Clones' first shot is different. It's a disruption of the pattern. And Empire Strikes Back last shot is a disruption of the pattern. So I don't really know too much of this, if there's any meaning behind that, other than Lucas likes to mess with patterns, and he talks about, everyone's kind of beaten to death that quote of him rhyming things, but
Right.
but in this case he's set up an anti-rhyme, I guess, in this case, which is and also I like the fact that things start upside down. Like we tilt up. Sorry, we're not panning. Panning's left and right. Tilt is up and down. We tilt up, and the ship is upside down. And the ship rolls right side up. So it's just like things start off topsy turvy. Things start off on an uneven footing. So like there's unexpected twists and turns again, setting up this idea of a mystery. So I just love that. Visually, we get that there.
Yeah, and I like it. Even as a kid, I remember thinking, "Wow, this feels different." Like you can just kind of feel like things are weird. Things are ominous. Things are not going well. Like you can't watch the scene and be like, "Oh man, this is just peaceful. Things are great." Something feels off, and it's a great jump into where we are at this point in the timeline, and just how messed up things are, and they're starting to turn over and get upside down. And yeah, it's the beginning of that.
Yeah. And it's mysterious, it's eerie, things are off.
Mm-hmm.
And this, as we said, this movie is a romantic mystery. So, and I've said this before. I can't remember if I said this before we kind of officially started the podcast, so I'll say it again. So each movie in Star Wars tells a different type of story. So Star Wars is never the same movie twice. This is why it's not a series like Mission Impossible, where each installment is the same story told in different ways. In Star Wars, each installment is a different story told in the same style. And so this, like you said, from the very beginning, this movie has a different vibe from the last one. This one feels like a mystery. This one feels like eerie, and it's foggy and quiet, and like fog is such a classic motif in mystery storytelling, right? I think of like foggy London, like Jack the Ripper. Like there's a killer waiting in the fog to come get you. Like that's exactly what's happening here. And so that's just that's such an old image in our, that's such an old archetypal image in our collective unconscious that we know from all these old stories and from all these old movies and paintings and whatever it is. Anytime there's fog, we know there's something. Sometimes it implies there's some kind of magic to it. There's something cool in the fog that you want. But a lot of times, especially in a city, like a foggy city, alleys are terrifying already, a dark alley. But when it's foggy too, you're like, really don't want to go down that alley. So that's kind of what was being set up here. So yeah, I love that. We descend into the fog. Like the ship kind of disappears into the fog, right? Like it's kind of bright and sunny outside, but the top of the buildings. But then we get into that fog, and now we're kind of freaked out, and all the characters are kind of on edge. So
yeah, and it feels very much like the beginning of episode 1 in the sense of like you don't see the main character. Yeah, like it feels to me. I don't know if George meant to do this, but it looks like when they are talking to Qui-Gon when they're just about to land into the droid control ship, it feels like that because you kind of see the captain-ish talking, and you just see the back of we're supposed to think the Queen here.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah,
it just feels similar. It's kind of that ominous. Totally. Something's weird. We're landing. You don't see the face yet, so it's just kind of neat. Yeah, and the fog thing, that's cool. I never even thought about it. I always got so distracted with how awesome the ships looked going into the fog and just how real they look. Just with the way that he has the reflections going on all the ships with the fog. Oh, it just looks great. So I always got distracted with that. But yeah, this whole murder mystery thing is like so new to me, and now I can totally see it.
Oh, it's like everywhere.
Just seeing like, wow. Oh yeah, like I didn't think about like London or Sherlock Holmes kind of feel, totally. Or something Jack the Ripper. That's great. I never even thought about that.
Yeah, visually there's a ton of homages to like film noir and kind of mystery filmmaking from the 30s. Like think of the blinds. We'll get there, but I'm too excited. I want to say right now, but the blinds in Padme's apartment, or when she's like sleeping, like the light coming through the blinds, like that's a classic film noir lighting trick, and have and you see that. We'll see some of that in Revenge of the Sith too, but there's things like that, kind of dark movie, what we call low key lighting, where there's a lot more shadow and contrast on the face as opposed to being very evenly lit. Phantom Menace was much more evenly lit, and as these movies go on, especially when we get to Revenge of the Sith, there's much more contrast and much darker. There's much more shadow in the lighting. Lucas tends to keep his lighting fairly simple, nothing too crazy, but you do definitely see a progression of it. Some filmmakers are much more flashy with their lighting, and it's very, very hard. Like Spielberg really loves like a harsh light that's like kind of hitting the edge of his characters that kind of separate them from the background. It's like lights up the back of their hair and their shoulders and stuff. And then and he likes a lot of fog and mist and kind of lighting that way. But so Lucas isn't quite as flashy with the lighting, but he's still very intentional. Not to say like he doesn't care. He is very intentional about it. He just doesn't. That's not as much of that's not a big part of cinematography that he's interested in as much as like the composition and color and movement. He's all about movement mostly. He loves the moving image, and so. But you'll see a lot of examples of film noir kind of mystery, just visual storytelling here, and this is a perfect example of that. That fog is
Oh, that's
totally
great.
a huge,
Yeah.
a
Boy,
huge
you feel it.
trope of that style. Yeah.
That's so neat. And tell me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I feel like, oh, not Panaka. What's the new captain's name?
Typho.
Typho. Thank you.
Gregor
He's
Typho.
nice. There you go. I feel like he's the guy. Like he says that classic. He says a version of it, but I feel like he says that classic line of like, "Well, things can't get any worse." You know,
Yeah, totally. Yep.
It just feels like that's what happens in these kind of homages like this, where it's just that classic line of like, "We made it. Wow, I guess there's no danger at all. I guess I was wrong." You know, it's just that. But to me, it's that old school. You know, just the
Absolutely.
classic lines, kind of like that, and it's just all of a sudden that's what sets up the big explosion.
Yeah, well, it's the classic, film noir. Like these two characters meet, like, oh, what I'm thinking of is Maltese Falcon, where there's a guy who goes to meet someone like an informant of his, or like he's going to get some information. And it starts out very friendly. He's like, hey, so what's the scoop, and all of a sudden, that's the moment, like when your guard is down, that's when the guy brings out a knife or he shoots you or something. Like that's such a classic, a turn in the story that happens in those classic mystery stories and movies, and exactly what's happening here. Yeah, and it's like, the Typh, even though Captain Typho is like, oh, there's no danger at all. Like everything in the scene is suggesting danger to the audience, right? The eerie music, the
Yeah.
fog, it's like, we know we're still on edge, and so, but yeah, that's a great detail to point out that his sort of talk about counterpoint, his very kind of happy remark, oh, things are fine, yeah, like things couldn't get any worse, and then all of a sudden, boom, literally.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very, very traditional. I don't know. I don't know what you want to call that. Piece trope of music, or I mean, of movies. Yeah, yeah. I definitely like it. And then, of course, we don't know. We think it's Padme, and then big giant explosion. I remember my kids jumped hardcore watching this for the first time. They did not see it coming at all. But they could tell something was wrong. When that explosion happened, they all just like, whoa. Yeah, it was good.
That's cool because, yeah, you and I have seen it a million times. We know what's coming, and so it's fun to see people react to it without knowing it. Yeah, because Lucas does play that, kind of a cheap little movie trick where he has Padme's voice over, is it Dorme, his the decoy, or she says
Yeah.
thank you, Lieutenant, or whatever. So it technically is still her voice, but
It is. He dubbed it. I wondered.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So it has a nice movie trick where it's like, you can't. It's also just a reminder. It's a movie, you can play these tricks in a movie, even though it's not like.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's like some Wikipedia page like Dorme was mimicking the voice of Padme. Like she trained herself, was using some technology. I'm like, it's just a movie. There's not an explanation for it. It's that. So I like things like that to kind of remind you, like, no, Lucas is a master of this craft, of this art, and that's part of the art. Is it's not reality. It's not. He's using these little bits and pieces of magic within that filmmaking world to tell his story. So, yeah, I like that, and I also like that the first character we really meet is R2. R2 is like my favorite character in Star. I love R2 so much, and so it's just fun to see that he's the first one that shows up. Really, even though we think we see Padme first, it's really R2.
Yeah. And George mentioned that how there's not a ton of droids in this story as far as like R2 and 3PO, but they're essential. And he said how he wanted to make that important right up front. Like, there's R2. Yep. At least I thought he said that. He definitely talked about R2 at the beginning. Yeah. I also really love this explosion. Like, it's just a really cool looking explosion. Boy, I just feel like, yeah, that is one of the benefits of moving to digital, is you just get this super clean, sharp look. And I love just the detail they put into that. Like, there's a piece of the ship that blows off and hits a Naboo starfighter.
Yeah, I caught that
knocks
for
it
the
off the
first time
platform.
last time I watched it. Yeah, I never noticed
Really?
that before. Yeah.
I just thought that was super cool. And you can hear it, and like someone just thought, hey, this would be fun, and they all blow back and pieces of fire everywhere, and the droid's on fire behind him. It's man, just fun. Just as a nerd,
Yeah.
I love it.
No, me too. Yeah, and I noticed that for the first time that that Naboo starfighter got taken out in that explosion. I remember thinking as I was watching this, I was trying to figure out which ship is Padme in. So I was thinking if she had stayed in if she was in that one ship and she stayed in there, she, technically the attack would have worked and would have killed her because she would have been tumbling off the platform there. But it's hard to tell. I think she's in actually one of the first. There's two ships leading the way, then there's the main ship, and there's one behind. I think she and Typho are in the first two. So I think they land together, and that one ship lands by itself. So I think that piece of debris hits that ship. So I don't think she would have been in that ship. Maybe there was someone in that ship. I don't know, because all we see is her and Typho get out.
That's
But
true. Huh?
anyway, yeah, again, very nerdy tiny little detail thing that no one cares about. But I was remember thinking like, oh, I wonder which ship Padme's in. Which she might have gotten hit by the debris there. But anyway,
well, that brings up an interesting point because, well, number one, we learned that Padme can pilot, so she knows how to fly. Number two, they suspect some kind of danger. Like Typho. I've never really thought about this. Typho says, "I guess I was wrong. There's no danger at all." And then they obviously plan on her not being in the ship. Like there's a decoy. So do you know why they're thinking that? Any of the history of that? Or is it just part of the storytelling? I mean, it seems really intentional. Like how they picked up there's a threat. Has she been threatened for a while? Or you know anything?
I think the last movie definitely sets a precedent that Naboo royalty and the security around high-ranking figures in Naboo culture, the decoy is part of their thing, it's part of their system. So that by itself isn't entirely, out of the ordinary. But the fact that she's coming to vote on this issue of the army and that the separatists are attacking, I want to say there's some mention of that in the rest of the movie, or in another part of the movie where he talks about the coming.
Well, that's
says,
true.
She says I shouldn't have come back like this because it's an important vote,
right.
and they know that she would be against it, and so
that's right.
And they know that people don't like her. She wouldn't be popular. Like, I don't know, because the Trade Federation, we know that Newt Gunray didn't actually go to jail, or if he did, like the Trade Federation is still going. Like they got away with a slap on the wrist after the last movie, and so she thinks that Count Dooku's behind it. So I think it's clear that she's clearly part of the loyalist movement, right? We see that in the next scene. She and Organa and all those people. So they are opposed to the separatists, and so maybe that right there is just enough of a threat that they're like, well, let's be careful here. But I feel like there's some sort of mention of that later in the movie, but I can't think of it right now. There's some
that
explanation, some more.
I never thought about how she
that.
just naturally knows that this is Dooku. Like that's her first thought. So there must be some kind of history, conflict there, some kind of awareness. Yeah. Huh. Good call. I never thought about that. Yeah, and the loyalists are not popular.
At least with the separatists, yeah.
Oh, interesting. I never put those two together. There you go.
But it's a great thing to point out, the fact that she is in disguise when we meet her, and then she has to go on. She's hiding, and she has to go into hiding later in this movie. And of course, that's something now she wanted to do in the last movie, but now she's uncomfortable with it. Like she says, I don't like this idea of hiding. Even the last movie, she was hiding. She was being a bit of a coward, and then she had to. That's when it's so cool to see how she's changed now. Now when she has to be forced into hiding, or before that was, that was kind of the default. And now I want to stay out. I want to stand out in the sun and be. I want to put myself in vulnerable positions because that's the best place I can be to fight for what's right. And everyone else is like, no, stay, take cover, stay behind, or be safe. And that's that's a great thing. Like Typho and Obi-Wan are like, is Padme or is Anakin going to be causing problems? Before Padme would have been much of a troublemaker, but now she's turned into one. She's going to she'll jeopardize her own safety in order to help others. But it's also just a running theme in this movie. Again, it's a mystery, is deception, right? There are several characters in this movie that aren't what they first appear to be. Think of Zam Wesell, right? She's a changeling. Think of Count Dooku. At the end of this movie, the big reveal that he's a Sith. We don't know about that for most of the movie. It's all a big mystery about who he is. And so she's already, I already talked about my notes that go into what I just said, so I won't repeat myself. But so basically, in the last movie, she thought she was safe at first, and then she used a decoy. But here, she's already starting as a decoy because, again, this movie is starting out on a more, it's a more rocky start. There's danger from the word go in this movie, as opposed to last time where it's the invasion didn't happen until just a little bit later in the movie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point. I never thought about this as a contrast between or just not contrast, but well, yeah, contrast, showing where she was between episode 1 and episode 2, and how much she's grown. That's pretty neat. Because yeah, I never thought about that, but you get the impression here that she didn't necessarily want to be the one in disguise. That this is kind of Typho's idea, never says outright, but you kind of get that impression. Maybe I'm reading into it, but
No, you're right. Because later on, she says, "I don't need more protection," and he's like, "The situation is more dangerous than the senator will admit." There's clearly tension in there that she wants to be more obvious about it, and he's the one who's always kind of pushing her to be a little more covert about it. So I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, that's cool. Boy, and yeah, just to think about her at this stage in episode 1, so different. Hiding behind the mask, hiding behind her decoys, and now she's like refusing to, but being forced to in some sense. But yeah, wow, that's a neat parallel. Not thought about before. Any more things on the platform? Notes, thoughts?
No, I think we covered most of what I wanted to get into, but just, yeah, she says, "I shouldn't have come back." They say this vote is very important, and so you can see how, it's clearly affecting her. She doesn't want to use a decoy because it's putting them. It's just clearly was friends with these people, and she doesn't want to. Yeah, it's the same Padme. She wants to protect her people, so she's more willing to put herself in danger. And but now we know. I think even just by Typho saying that the soda is very important, and she's like, "I shouldn't have come back." Like there's this tension around this. Even if you read the crawl, or if you didn't read the crawl, now like, oh yeah, there's a lot of problems going on. There's a lot of tension going on right now because of this vote that's coming up with Padme involved and everything. So yeah, other than that, I'm ready to move on to the next one if you want.
Okay. Yeah, the only thing I can think of is just the progression we see. I'm just thinking about how the beginning of each movie, each Star Wars movie, is they progressively 1, 2, and 3 get progressively more dangerous. Maybe you get thrown into the action quicker.
Yeah.
Like episode 1, you get into the action pretty quick, but it still takes a while, right? They got to land, they're waiting around, we meet the Nemoidians, that kind of thing. Here, it's just like, get off the ship, boom, and then episode 3, just pan over and you're right in the war and just kind of see the chaos just progressing. And then episode 4, 5, and 6, it's not so much, right? I mean, episode 4, for sure, you're still in the chaos of it. Like it's, the Tantive 4 comes out and it's just boom, 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 we're in a battle. And then episode 5 and 6, they start out slower. So I don't know if that was intentional, kind of a, seeing the progression of the chaos. But
no, that's cool. I hadn't quite thought of it that way.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it now. I wonder if that was intentional on his part, or it feels like it.
Yeah, I know that each movie starts off with the bad guy making a move, right? It's always, and I've talked about this before, but with you, but that each movie starts with the bad guys making a move on the chessboard, and the heroes have to react to it. So it's always, yeah. Whether they're sending probes to, and they're finding the hidden base in Empire Strikes Back, or invading Coruscant or attacking Coruscant, Revenge of the Sith. There's never a happy moment where things are peaceful, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere, Godzilla shows up and starts destroying the city. It always starts off like with something already bad happening, and then the first thing is always something the bad guy's making a move. But I like what you're saying, that the level of it, the intensity of it, the threat level changes and gets increasingly more and more dangerous. That's a really good point, because and it's just like we talked about how the crawl gets more and more intense. The first shot of the first scene in each movie gets more and more intense, where we build up to war, right? And then we see visually, what a perfect, that first shot, once they go over the lip of that, the hull of that ship, and there you just see all those starships and all those laser bolts like flying back and forth. Like, oh, there's a perfect visual depiction of war.
Oh, so
right.
good.
And so, yeah, great. Yeah, exactly. So that's a great call, great point that you made. I love that. I never thought about that, how each movie kind of builds, each first scene builds in intensity.
Yeah, that is interesting. I never thought, I'm just thinking out loud right now. But then it kind of tapers off as you go. Like 5 and 6, they kind of get less. Like 5, there's not really a battle, but you see the droids, the pro droids, and then episode 6, there really isn't
Vader's
a lot of action.
Yeah.
Like episode 1, there's not a lot of action for a few minutes. Takes a little bit, but again, I don't know if that's intentional. That's just Nathan. So that's not George stuff. That's just me. So
it's interesting though. We'll have to look into that more.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. And something I was thinking about. We've talked about this before, but as we're into it now, just thinking about it more, how episode 2 is supposed to mimic episode 5 in some ways. This is that middle story. There's a lot of same beat for beat stuff, and the romance happens here and that kind of stuff. We'll talk about, but just makes you think about that. Yeah. Anyway, we'll get into it. Great. We want to move on to the introduction of the Jedi and Palpatine here for episode 2.
Yeah, let's go it. Let's go it. I can't talk. Let's do it. Let's go for it and let's do it. I said, let's go it. So
sounds good.
Great start. Just anyway.
That's right. I love it. Nice. So I was looking at the archive book. Maybe you'll bring this up. I'm sorry if I'm stealing any thunder, but
no, I'll go for it.
This is the first time we see Palpatine's office, right? And I think in the book, in the archive book, they had concept art of that, and there was this idea. You can't ever really, at least maybe you can correct me. I've never been able to tell if this is true or not, but the idea, at least in the concept art for Palpatine's office, was that the only way to get to it was through ship. Like it was, you can't just walk there kind of thing. Like you have to take some kind of ship or transportation to get to it to keep him safe. And it's got some of the same aesthetics, but I was curious if you knew if that is the case here. I mean, we never see anything like that, I guess.
I don't.
Well, maybe in Clone Wars we see it's part of the big tundra, right? The Senate tundra, is that? I don't know. Maybe not. Now I'm questioning myself.
I'm trying to think. So we see Anakin take that speeder from the Jedi Temple to Palpatine's office to face Windu and him in Revenge of the Sith. But I remember reading that in the archive. I haven't gotten. I've been reading the myth making behind the scenes book of Attack of the Clones. I need to go back and reread the archive book. But I remember coming across that, and I don't know anything else about that. I'm not sure if that's still true in the movie or not. It seems like in Clone Wars and Revenge of the Sith, there's a place where everyone parks all their cars, so to speak. They parks their ship and then they take an elevator or something. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
But
yeah, that might be. Because now I'm thinking of the Zillo Beast episode where he like looks in Palpatine's window, and I think he's sitting on the Senate tundra thing. So maybe it's just part of the Senate tundra. But
well, that's the one thing that I didn't realize for the longest time was that this is actually a building we've never seen before. So this building is new, on course. So this is not the same thing as the Senate rotunda or the Senate building. This is the executive offices. So this building is close to that building where the Senate is, but these are separate buildings.
Oh, it is a separate building.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Which I didn't know that for the longest time. But if you look at it's very clear. I mean, they're both kind of dome shaped, which makes it kind of hard to realize. But if you look at them, they're very different shapes and they're in very, very different parts of the city. So I think there is a wide shot, and I think it's Revenge of the Sith where you see both in the same shot.
Really?
But this movie, I think there is. This movie is the debut of this building because we've never seen Palpatine's office before, and I'm not sure if this was something that was true during the production of Attack of the Clones that Lucas was talking about when they were creating this environment, or if this was something that came out of legends or other material. But I think the idea is that this building was built between Phantom Menace and now, in the intervening 10 years. So Palpatine gave himself the idea that Palpatine gave himself a grander office and isolated himself from the rest of the Senate and stuff like that. So I like, if that's true, I like that idea. I just don't know if that was technically Lucas's idea. But point being, this is a different building, and it's the first time seeing it, and so it is.
I knew we've never seen his office before, but I didn't realize it was a separate building completely. I know that concept said it wanted it to be, but I never noticed the actual canon if it was or not.
Yeah,
so,
the Senate building is a little more mushroom shaped. This one's kind of just a dome.
Interesting.
And the Senate building has this big long walkway leading up to it. It has these statues around it. And, yeah,
that's cool. Well, and you got to talk about the aesthetics here. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, I mean,
I'm sure you'll bring it up.
I mean, yeah, it's not, anyone with eyes can see it, so they don't. No one needs me to explain this, but we see this huge office of his, and it's covered in these red tones, and there's these creepy statues all over the place. And even the light fixtures. Remember always looking at the light fixtures and how kind of aggressive looking they were. Like as a kid, I got a really weird vibe from this room. I never really liked this room as a kid. It always looked weird to me. And we saw his office before his apartment in Phantom Menace as a senator, which is also kind of very more like kind of burgundies and reds, and but now it's that it's this massive thing, and we see red guards for the first time in the background, and they're only ever seen with Palpatine, so they're uniquely for him. So that's not a good sign, right? Like the blue guard, they protect everyone else, but we don't think anything of the red guards yet, but they're only there for Palpatine. So he has his own private guard, which is not a good sign, right? And so we don't think much of them yet, but then eventually realize, oh, these become the guards, the sentinels of the Emperor, when he takes over.
Do you know that we see it in the sequel trilogy? But is there anywhere confirmed where that was inspired by the Roman Praetorian Guard? Do you know? I
That's a
thought that
great
was
point.
an actual inspiration for these before
I think you're
Disney
right.
took it. But in the sequel trilogy, they actually call him the Praetorian Guard
Right.
for
That's
Snoke.
true.
But I was curious on if we'd seen anything official. I thought we did. I couldn't point to anything.
I mean, even just looking at the design of the helmets, especially for the Blue Republic Guard, right? Like there's something very Roman and very
Yeah.
Mediterranean, like Greek and Roman about that. The shape of the helmet and the red of the Imperial Guards, I guess, as they come to be known. I'm not sure exactly what they're called technically here. They definitely evoke that. I'm not sure. I wouldn't, especially being red too. That was a big color for the Praetorian Guard in Rome. I wouldn't be surprised if that is what it was. I don't know for sure though. But that's a great little thread to follow because I would love to find out.
Yeah, I've wondered that because I thought I remember that somewhere. Years ago, I thought I remember reading that somewhere, that there's a lot of inspiration for the Empire from the Roman Empire, not simply just Germany and Nazis, with Julius Caesar and kind of things like that. But I can't confirm that. I thought I heard that years ago, but yeah, I can't confirm that. I have to look at that. But yeah, something is interesting though. That first shot that we see in Palpatine's office, man, it just screams Death Star 2. Palpatine's in the same looking chair. The chair looks exactly the same. He's got the window behind him.
Oh, good call. I never thought about the window. Yeah.
Yeah. He's really high up still, so it just looks like right out of the Death Star, and then the red and grays, and he's in black, that kind of thing. And I don't know how intentional this is, but I always thought as a kid that those light fixtures, they always reminded me of TIE fighters. They have that same,
they do kind of look
two
like
wings in the center. I always thought
that's funny.
he was homaging to TIE fighters, but I don't know if that's true or not. So, yeah,
That's a good call about the window because I know the chair was specifically designed to be reminiscent of the one from Revenge of the Jedi. One of the many titles of that movie, Return of the Jedi. But that's a great call about the window too, because that's where he. And then later in the scene, there's a part where he kind of looks out over the window, like over his kingdom in a way. It's kind of like it's sort of his like his high tower on the Death Star, right? Like he has this vantage point, like looking down on everybody. That's a great call. Never thought about that.
He likes to look out the window.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He and Vader both, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Sith love to look pensively out a window.
Uh-huh.
One thing I guess forgot to mention was that that first establishing shot, we see the fog is starting to lift in that scene. Right, we start to see the fog kind of recede in the distance there, and so I like that it's like, oh, we're safe in the sunlight now, right? And so we cut to Palpatine, and it's like, oh, we're safe. It's Palpatine. He's safe. We're safe. It's in the sunlight, but even there's still danger. Even when the fog goes away, there's still a danger there. So I like that. And of course, I should have brought this up first. First things first, the most important character in all of Star Wars, Kit Fisto. He's here. You get to see him.
That's right.
Star Wars is really his story. You can't change my mind. He's the best character. So just want to point that out because
that's great.
Of course,
I thought of you this week, or maybe it was last week, because they just released his what is it? The like really nice action figures, like not Hasbro, but the FH. I think they're called FH figures. They're really high quality figures, and they just released Kit Fisto's. I was going to send it to you, but I figured
is it his Revenge of the Sith style, or is it like Attack of the Clones look?
I think it's Revenge of the Sith.
See, everyone always does Revenge. See, I'm a huge. I love it. He looks cool in both, but I really love his Attack of the Clones look, and for some reason, that one just never shows up very much everywhere. Like Clone Wars, I was so happy in Clone Wars they used his Attack of the Clones look because he looks so much more friendly and cooler. Revenge of the Sith, he kind of has like these fangs and his eyes a little longer, and he looks a little more like bug-like or a little alien-like.
Yeah,
he still looks cool.
I didn't like his look. Yeah,
but and it looks. I think the best version of that is actually the figure you gave me. I think that's the best version of the Revenge of the Sith Kit Fisto that I have right here. Why not?
Hey, that's right. Let's see it, man.
There he is. There's my man.
Hey, there's Kit Fisto.
And he has like one dreadlock on either side, as opposed to like he used to have like two that were like strapped together in his Attack of the Clones version. But anyway, I love Kit Fisto. Sorry for everyone's listening. No one can see this, but I'm holding up the Kit Fisto figure that Nathan got me.
Black Series, baby. It's good stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. They got a new one, but yeah, always. And there's not a lot of photos of him. I mean, they didn't know. There's no way they could have known he was going to be this. All the Jedi in the background were going to be these, big marketable characters, especially for Clone Wars. But like, I always wanted to find more photos and images of him in that Attack of the Clones look. But anyway, well, that's cool. They got a new figure of him out there.
Yes, Sideshow. That's who the
Sideshow. That's what it is.
Sideshow.
Yes. Oh, they do. They make great ones. Okay.
Yeah, they just released Kit
I'll have to look that
Fistos,
up.
and he looks pretty good.
Cool.
So I love his look in Clone Wars. I thought he was amazing in Clone Wars. So anyway, I was going to send it to you, but I figured he'd already seen it, so maybe I'll send it to you.
No, I haven't. No, I'm out of the loop on all that stuff. So yeah, if you see something, definitely send it to me because I probably guarantee you I haven't heard about it.
Nice.
But,
for those of you who don't know, I'm a huge collector. I like the toys. So Josiah's working on it. I'm trying to get him better.
I collect quotes, and Nathan collects toys.
There you go.
I internalize my fandom. You externalize it.
There you go.
I have movie posters in my room. I have a bunch of movie posters, so one of them is Star
true.
Wars, and so I do that a little bit. And I
collector.
love, and I have all the figure, like the Kit Fisto thing you gave me. It's has a prominent spot on my shelf over there with my other stuff. And when people give me stuff, I definitely love it. But for some reason I never think to get it for myself. Although I do want Kit Fisto's lightsaber. That is my white whale. I will get that eventually, by hook or by crook. But
nice. There you go. So fans, if you want to support Josiah, there you go.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll set up a Patreon just so I can afford to buy a Kit Fisto lightsaber.
That's right.
That's awesome.
So
Anyway,
worth it. Nice.
So not to distract us, but I got to point out the greatest character in all Star Wars whenever he shows up. So.
Hey man, everybody has their favorite, right? Dave Filoni is Plo Koon. He's sitting there too.
Yeah. And Plo Koon's my dad's favorite too. So.
Really?
Give him a shout out. Luminara. Who else is there?
Oh, and Barris.
I don't have it in front of me. Barris. That's right, Barris.
Barris. This is the first time we see Barris, and that's my wife's favorite. She loves Barris.
Oh, nice.
So
Barris is cool.
There you go.
Nice.
So, and I always thought that was interesting because again, we've talked about this, but I just love how George just fills in these spaces. Like he just created a Padawan here that has zero dialogue. We don't know anything about her at all, but it's just cool. She's standing in the back here just for this one scene. I just think that's awesome how he does that. He's just really good at that documentary style again. So. Yeah. And
I always forget that she's there, but Sly Moore is there. I always kind of forget that she's even in this scene.
That creepy lady that stands by Palpatine?
Yeah, the Umbaran kind of aide to Palpatine. It's like she's always it's one of those. She's kind of like the Emperor's guys in Return of the Jedi. They're just kind of just there in the background. We don't know who they are. They just kind of just stick around. And so I like that. Like even though Masameda has like dialogue and has more of a character, there's these kind of weird characters that just kind of surround Palpatine, and they don't really say much, really know what they do, but you just get the idea that they're up to no good. Like she doesn't do much to lighten up the atmosphere, right? No one's really happy to see her. She doesn't really give you a very cheery vibe.
I was gonna bring that up because again, it reminds me of the Death Star, right, from Return of the Jedi. He's just surrounded by these creepy guys who are just like look pale, dead. She's no different. She looks pale and dead too. And the way this frame is set up, I've never thought about this. You have the Jedi all on one side, and then Palpatine in that. What's her name? Sly? Is her name?
Sly Moore.
No. Sly Moore. She's right behind him on the same side. Like the shot is split in two. The Jedi and Sith basically facing one another. It's a very telling shot, because you have all these Jedi here, and then you have one Sith. It's like wow,
yeah, absolutely.
Surrounded by his pawns. It's kind of an interesting introduction to him in the season or episode 2. So
yeah, and it's interesting because we see the Jedi and the politicians in the same room together, and this is what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be, working with each other and figuring out how to, bring peace to the galaxy and solve these disputes and all that. But this is the first time we've seen them together. In Phantom Menace, they're in their separate, they were in the Jedi were in the temple, Chancellor, Senator, they're all in the Senate building doing their own thing, and so they're all kind of just the threat wasn't big enough that they needed to, come together. But now, because of this huge threat, we kind of see them. They're having meetings and they're both, they're both voicing their concerns about things falling apart. We're keepers of the peace, not soldiers. Like I won't let the Republic split in two. We're seeing them having a difficult time figuring things out. Now, obviously, Palpatine's not doing it in bad faith. Like it's all a ruse, it's all an act for him. But this is still what the Senate, what the Chancellor and the Jedi would have done. throughout the world. But so I think it's no mistake this is the first time we see the Jedi and the Senate and the politicians working together, because we'll see the loyalists come in a minute, because this is where, they need to hash things out, and this is where it's when they're both falling apart, when they're both kind of losing their influence, and the Jedi aren't able to protect the galaxy, and the Senate's not able to keep it together. Like there are all these systems that are wanting to separate, and that's now we're seeing them kind of like coming to each other, like, we got to help each other out. Do we got to figure something out? And so I just like that this is our first look at that, where they'd probably have a much more pleasant interaction, but here we're seeing the Jedi and the politicians kind of really kind of both stressed out, like we can't do our jobs right now. So it's our first look at that.
That's really neat. Wow. Yeah, I never thought about that. So I want to mention one thing, and then I think we should dive into the dialogue here, because it's really packed. I think there's some big dialogue stuff here, but in real time, like in our history, not Star Wars history, this is the first time we get digital Yoda. It's like, now George went back and put him digitally in episode 1, but for those of us who were growing up, this was the first time we saw digital Yoda, because he was a puppet in episode 1 originally, and then George replaced him, and that was a big deal. Speaking of digital, this is the first time we saw that. And as we'll see later, George did that very intentionally, because Yoda has a big fight scene that you can't do with a puppet later on. But I'm going to save that for later. I just wanted to point that out, because you can see Yoda sitting there. This is the first time we see that.
Yeah.
And there he is, digital Yoda, for the very first time.
Yeah, and Jar Jar definitely paved the way for that. Like he was kind of the test. As George said, he was the key to all this. Everyone takes that quote out of context. Jar Jar was the key to making sure all the digital characters were working, and so Yoda definitely was the team. Rob Coleman and John Knoll and everyone who was working on the visual effects side of things really wanted to prove to George that they could make a digital Yoda for this movie, and they convinced him, and it looks great. I remember I've always liked CGI Yoda. Yoda's never.
Yeah.
I liked Phantom Menace Yoda as a kid too, because I hadn't lived on this earth long enough to gotten used to Empire and Return of the Jedi so much that I didn't Phantom Menace Yoda really freaked me out, because I don't remember. This is the first Star Wars movie I remember being new. Like, this is the first Star Wars movie where I remember at a time before this movie, and then I remember it coming out. Phantom Menace was kind of like there at the beginning for me. So, but yeah, so I've liked every version of Yoda, really. I do agree that Phantom Menace Yoda looks the weirdest, but
yeah, he does look a little goofy. I will say that.
Yeah, I just something weird about that. But anyway, CGI Yoda, great. Did a fantastic job, especially for 2002. Like, it definitely looks dated now, but it's still an effective character. Like, the animation is top notch, and like the emotion coming out of him is still as good as anything you'd see today. The animators really nailed it, even if the rendering is dated at this point. It still looks great. His character still shines through.
Yeah, I would say it totally holds up today. For whatever reason, I feel like digital technology in movies, we've almost taken steps back. Like, it's looking more fake than real. I felt like 10 years ago, maybe somewhere in there, 5-10 years ago, it was at its peak, where it was like, wow, I can't tell if that's digital or real. But now we're starting to get into this, like, that's very digital again.
Yeah, that's the tragedy of like having 20 different visual effects houses on the same movie, and they have no time to work on things. It's such a machine now. Or this is back in the day where they could still spend a lot of time making sure it was dialed in and getting it right. And so visual effects we have the ability to make it look better now than back then, absolutely, but just not everyone is afforded the time or the resources now to do it, and so the quality suffers, unfortunately. So yeah, whenever you see a movie where they do take the time, like Weta is really good at picking projects where they get to take their time, like the last Avatar movie and the new Planet of the Apes movie. They did a really good job making the visual effects look great. But a lot of the like Marvel stuff, like they have to churn those movies out so quickly. Their schedule is just so hard to keep up with that they need so many different visual effects houses to keep up with that it can suffer. The final result can suffer, unfortunately. So this is a time when ILM was still the biggest name in the visual effects world. They were doing the best work of anyone, and this shows. This was a huge thing to take a beloved. Jar Jar was a new character, but to take a beloved character that everyone loved. Okay, that was very redundant, Josiah. Beloved and loved. Take a character that everyone liked and had a history for, nostalgia for, and go digital with that and do it very, very differently, and hopefully that worked. That's a huge risk. And
Yeah, big risk.
I haven't heard. I know there are people who don't like it, but I haven't heard nearly as much negative reactions to CGI Yoda as one might have expected. I think they're largely very successful with him.
Yeah, I've heard more criticism, and again, I'm just one man, but for one who's pretty well versed in the Star Wars community, like I hear far more criticisms on the puppet in Episode 1 than I ever have
Yes.
CGI Yoda.
Absolutely.
In fact, many people were very happy George replaced the puppet with CGI Yoda,
Which is funny, right?
So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because everyone's like,
Yeah.
all puppets are the way to go. It's like, I mean, no, it's the best way to go is the way to go. Like whatever the best tool to get the job done is the best way. And I think in the prequels it was CG for Yoda. I think, but in the original trilogy, obviously it was the puppets. But yeah, it's interesting that people don't like it. It's because now everyone's like, oh no, we were tired of seeing CGI. We want practical effects. But back then people didn't like the practical effects. People didn't like the Yoda from Phantom Menace, so they preferred the CGI. So that's a great point. I didn't think about that.
I was trying to see if I can find this quote here. George says this: there's a lot of controversy about the fact that we're shooting Episode 2 digitally. People ask, why am I doing this? The real question is, why not? It's vastly superior in every way. It's cheaper. You'd have to be nuts not to shoot this way. Yeah, and then there's the quote you mentioned earlier. As far as I'm concerned, we should have been shooting digital cinema 20 years ago. Where was it? Something. This is a little bit of a tangent, but we're kind of on digital stuff again. And we talked about this a little bit with Phantom Menace, but George said, I'm a strong proponent, for better or for worse, of making a film that works. By that, I mean the audience can follow the story, be entertained by the story, be moved by the story, or educated by the story. I'm not that interested, ultimately, in having it technically perfect. I've discovered that has nothing to do with telling a story. So, and he goes on to talk about kind of the idea we've brought out before, and George again said it recently, like Star Wars is not just putting a fancy lightsaber or a ship in it. Like that's not what it's about. It's a tool to tell the story. And he talks about it here. And I feel like that is kind of what we're talking about here with Yoda, right? Like that was a big deal for him. But it wasn't, I mean, yes, George was trying to pioneer technology, but it was for the sake of the story. He wasn't just trying to be like, hey, look how cool I am, and I think we'll talk about that with Yoda, right? Like he needed a CGI Yoda because you just can't do those moves with a puppet. So I appreciate that. And he talks about how Hollywood back then, and I would argue Hollywood today, flips that. It's like we're just going to push the boundary just because we can, and it's cool, not for the sake of the story. And I appreciate George doing that. His goal was the story. Everything else was a tool to tell that story. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, there's many quotes. I like that one you picked out there. There's many quotes from Lucas where he talks about, the tools are in service to the story. Like the art, he pushes the technology, and art has always pushed technology to keep up with it. But it's always, at the end of the day, it has to be about communicating to the audience a character, a feeling, an emotion, a plot, a story, whatever it is. If it's not just there to like, wow, look at the flashing lights and colors. It's got to be, there's got to be some substance behind it. And so I'm very, very happy that he knew that he kept that in mind throughout all these movies that he worked on, and all these Star Wars projects he undertook. That was always there. Like, and Clone Wars, right? Like pushing the boundaries of the digital and CG technology for kids television with a very, very limited budget. That's, he still had that. It wasn't just there like, oh, look, we got a CG show, and like, let's put a lot of budget and resources into making these really cool space scenes, whatever. Like, no, he's like, I still want to tell the story, even if it's a simple story that's not like the most flashy thing. It's like all this is in service to that. And he stayed that way. So yeah, and it's very hard to, again, studios love something that they know. They love a formula. Like, oh, this will make movies with big special effects and a lot of CGI tend to make a lot of money. Let's just do that then. Well, no, it's because they also had a story too. That's, so it's always good to see someone. It's always nice to watch Star Wars because it's a reminder that there's artists like Lucas who know that and are aware that the story comes first. All right, that's it for this episode. Join us in the next one as we continue our series on Attack of the Clones. As always, thanks for listening, and on to the next one.